Hi everyone, it's Dr. Mendez-Escobar here. In this video, I'd like to go over my steps for interpreting a child observation using course readings and go over an example of how to apply these steps using a video observation. Let's begin. Alrighty, so here are the 6 steps, and I will link them below so that you can have access to this image later. So the key here is you want to make sure that anything you do in terms of interpreting child observation, that you're using your course resources and showing your understanding of that material. That is always going to be the key. And one way that you do this is through explaining a child observation. Explaining means interpreting, using the course content. Alright, so the very first step that you want to do is observe the child. And you can do this in vivo, in person, or through video. It really depends on the task at hand. So you want to make sure that you're observing the child. The second step is, while you're observing, so steps 1 and 2 are happening together. So step 2 is, while you're observing, you want to take detailed notes. What do you see the child doing? Where are they? Who is there? What is the child saying? And always your focus is going to be on the child. If the child is interacting with others, your notes are always going to be centered on what the child that you are observing is doing, even in a social setting. You're going to write down everything you see. It's almost like if you are recording with your mind through your notes. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're taking detailed notes while you're observing. Once you're done with these 2 steps, and this might take several times, you might observe the child multiple times, then we can begin to interpret. You always want to interpret bit by bit. So steps 3, 4, 5, and 6 are going to focus on just a small aspect of the observation. If your assignment asks you to observe, say, across different developmental domains, then you're going to choose different behaviors to interpret. So for the sake of this video, we're going to focus just on one snapshot. But always you want to make sure that you refer back to whatever your assignment directions are to know what you need to do to complete that particular assignment. This video is just showing you how you take what you observed and you interpret it using course content. Okay, so step 3 is you want to choose a behavior to interpret. Now, oftentimes when you're interpreting child observation, you're focusing on their development. However, in order to interpret anything in terms of observation, you're going to be focusing on behaviors. So you're going to choose a key behavior or one that you've identified for yourself. Okay, so choose a behavior to interpret. Then step 4 moves on to, okay, well, what is the concept that you're going to use to interpret? And a concept can be a theory, it can be a milestone, or it can be some other developmental concept or term that you can use to really make sense of what you observed. So for this step, you're just identifying the concept. And if you're unsure what concept to choose, so what theory, milestone, or idea to choose, go to your reading. Your reading will give you a good idea of what you might want to use, what concept. Whenever you're going to go through steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, you want to make sure that first you have done your reading. It is going to be really difficult to do these steps if you have not completed your readings. So once you've identified the concept, then you can move to step 5, which is how would you explain this concept using what you learned from the reading? So if it is a theory, you read about the theory, now in your own words, explain the theory. What do you understand about this theory? Sometimes in your as you're trying to explain the theory, you might go to the text and you might paraphrase or put in your own words what you learned. And whenever you do this in your assignment, when you're writing about it, this is what you are citing. And you cite your source. Where did you get this information? So if it was from a textbook, you would cite the author by putting in parentheses the author's last name, comma, the year in which this text was written. And if you are, for step 5, using direct quotations, then you would quote the author. However, in order to show your understanding of the course material, you're going to need to explain concepts in your own words, because that shows what you learned from the reading. Then you can move to the last step, which is step 6, which is how does this concept help you understand the child's behavior? This is going to be where you are going to connect step 3, the behavior that you chose to interpret, with step 5, your explanation of a concept. Use this concept to help you explain what you observed. And all of these steps are preparation for your assignment. This is not your assignment. So as you take detailed notes when you observe, then you're also you can also continue your notes and choosing behaviors to interpret, identifying concepts, your explanation of the concept, and then your notes about how the behavior is explained with this concept. So now I'd like to move to an example of how you would apply these steps. So the very first step is to observe the child. In this video, we're going to be observing the child through a video observation. So the Colorado Department of Education has posted several videos of young children, so within infancy all the way through early childhood, that serve as educational observation videos. So that's what we're going to refer to today. And I'll also link this video down below. Since the video is going to be linked down below, I recommend that you pause now, watch the video. After you're done with that, you're going to come back and continue watching this video. What I'll do for this video is I'm going to play the video on mute and I'll give some narration just so that we can get to what's happened in this video and then the behavior that I'll be focusing on. So I'm going to hit play. All right, so what we're seeing here at the start of this video is we're seeing a child whose entire body is being traced. Okay, so in this particular case, this child's based on the video is named Prapti. Although for the sake of our interpretation, and whenever we're observing children, we want to give a pseudonym, so a pretend name, to protect the child's privacy and maintain their anonymity. Okay, so in this particular video, the child's body was traced. So that then we move along, and what we're seeing here is throughout, the child is drawing details within the video. Excuse me, they're drawing details about in this particular case themselves. So here we see the child drawing buttons. Earlier we saw the child drawing their face. Additional details here. Okay, here we're seeing the top of the child's blouse. We see that they've added hair, detail in the hair, perhaps their hair tie was also in the video, excuse me, in the drawing. Here we see the child kind of talking through what they've been doing. This was after they received some help with their with the shoe. And then we see like a fast forward motion of the child drawing in some, coloring in rather, the details. Okay. Then, in this particular instance, the child goes back to pick another crayon. They're like, wait, this is orange. I'm looking for peach. And the teacher's walking the child through, identifying the color that they need. And okay, so we see one interaction there, another interaction there rather. They continue to draw, color in these, the details that they've drawn in. And then now they get to this point where they're talking about their drawing to a teacher who is recording the child explaining their drawing. And then the teacher asks the child to take a pause, take a break, so that they can go slower in effort to provide an explanation. Okay, and then we move toward the end here. Okay, so if you looked at the video, in this particular section, which is the section that we're going to be focusing on, the teacher is asking the child about how did you know what details to draw in terms of like identifying like what their process is through here, and getting the child to provide more detailed explanations. Then toward the end, then the child is asked to, they're writing what the drawing is. And through this writing, the writing process is also one that's being supported by the teacher here who is recording the child. I think the recording is for the child's parents, so it's going to go home. So through the support that the teacher is offering, the child is able to write a sentence about the drawing. The sentence turns out to be, "This is me." So the focus, the behavior that I'm going to be focusing on for this video is going to be this piece. So as the child explains their drawing, and then as they write, "This is me." So that is going to be the chosen behavior. Okay, so I indicated what the chosen behavior is just so that you have a reference point. However, let's go through the steps. It's really important to go through the steps. So the first step was observe the child. And as I mentioned earlier, steps 1 and 2 are going to happen in tandem. So we've observed the child, and during that time, you were also taking detailed notes when observing. So here I'd like to show you my own notes. So as I was preparing for this video, I also conducted the observation of the child. And in a video that was just under 7 minutes, so we can round it up to 7 minutes, but there's an intro and an outro, so it's a little bit shorter than that. My notes of the video started around here. You can see this. Let me I'd like to annotate where my notes began. So they started here. All of this, all that there. So all of this are my notes of the particular video. So I just saw just those few minutes, and this is the level of detail that I have. So I have some information, some notes about what the child is doing, what they, so they're posing, then they're drawing in, coloring the eyes. So I have some notes about the actions. I also have some direct quotes that about what the child is saying. So in terms of their language. So such as, "Look at mine. I made nails." I also wrote, I need my socks. Those are some of the things that the child wrote. I also wrote about the interactions that they were having. Okay, such as I mentioned, going to the teacher and saying, "Oh, this is not peach, that's orange." So really, this is the level of detail that I highly recommend as you're putting your notes together. So I just wanted to show you this because even as I'm doing this, I'm also writing notes. Okay, so now we're going to look at steps 3, 4, 5, and 6 individually. Okay, so for step 3, In the example, the child behavior that I'm choosing is the explanation of the drawing and writing the sentence, "This is me." So step 3, choose a behavior to interpret. This is the behavior that I'm going to be interpreting. Then step 4, identify the concept. So here, this is where you, based on your reading, you're going to identify a theory, milestone, or developmental concept with which to interpret what you chose for that child behavior. So in this particular case, I'm going to choose Vygotsky's theory, that is the sociocultural learning theory. So I'm going to be explaining a cognitive developmental aspect of this observation. Vygotsky's theory explains how children learn within the context of others. So it's a cognitive theory. Oftentimes you're going to find that development does not happen in isolation. Okay, so there might be some social interactions. If you are explaining an aspect of social emotional development, you can probably still choose this the child behavior that I chose. However, I'm going to be focusing on cognitive development. In this particular case, learning using Vygotsky's theory. So then in step 5, how would you explain the concept using what you've learned from the reading? So the explanation of the concept is going to need to include what is Vygotsky's theory and what domain it falls under. So in the previous slide, I gave you a brief overview of the theory. You can also go on to say how Vygotsky's perspective was, how learning happens within a social context. Okay, and moreover, how children learn with others. So you're going to explain identify and explain specific ideas to the theory, such as scaffolding, more knowledgeable other, or MKO, the zone of proximal development, ZPD. So scaffolding, identify what is it, identify it, and then explain what it is. Okay, which is how a more knowledgeable other helps with either questioning or through interactions, direct interaction. It helps move the learner along in their learning. It helps build on the learner, on what the learner already knows. And this is the more knowledgeable other. So this is someone who knows just a bit more than the child. And it can be a teacher or a parent, but it can also be another child. And it could be a child that has already learned this particular concept. It can be a slightly older child. So even though in many of the examples, there are, even in this one that I'm using today, it's a teacher who's a more knowledgeable other, I do want to highlight that that more knowledgeable other can be someone else that knows just a bit more, including a child. And then the ZPD, or zone of proximal development, that's the range of where the child's learning currently is up to where it can go with support, that scaffolding. So you want to make sure that you're explaining all of this. And in your notes, a tip for you is, where did you get this information? What part of the textbook did it come from? So cite the text. So you're always going to want to cite the text when you're explaining a theory and the concepts, because you learn them after you read. So that's why you cite the text. So then that moves us to the last step, which is step 6. So in this particular step, you're going to explain, how does this concept help you understand the child's behavior? So referring to the chosen behavior in this particular example, why is Vygotsky's theory good for explaining this behavior? How does scaffolding come up? What happens when the child's learning within, oh, that's a typo there. What happens to the child's learning with the more knowledgeable other? How does the child move through the zone of proximal development with scaffolding for the more knowledgeable other? So in this particular case, the child is able to explain the drawing, specifically how the details were added, Once the teacher, in this case the more knowledgeable other, is asking really specific questions, which is the scaffolding. And some of those specific questions is, how did you know what to add? So that then the child can say, well, I looked at myself. So they looked at what they were wearing and that's what they were able to do. So through this process of scaffolding with the more knowledgeable other, the child's explanation of what they drew becomes more detailed and more concise, and they are learning this is the level of detail to provide when I'm explaining something. Okay? And the scaffolding didn't just allow the child to verbally explain their drawing, but also in the writing. As you listen through in the video, the teacher asked the child, well, what would you write about this? So then the child can come up with something. Even in the spelling of the word me, the more knowledgeable other, the MKO, which is in this case was the teacher, scaffolded the child. So instead of telling the child, you spell me, M-E, the teacher asked really specific questions so that the child can get there on their own, so that they can expand on their learning. Those really specific questions were scaffolding, and the child expanded their learning. In essence, they moved through their zone of proximal development, what they're able to do with some support within what they're already able to do. It's not beyond that. It's not too difficult that the child can get to it there. Okay, so that is how you go through these different steps. That is how you go through these 6 steps in order to interpret child observation. In this particular case, the steps will take you to bit by bit. Now, a key thing, as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you are reviewing the assignment directions. These steps are not your assignment. This is just walking you through how you would interpret one behavior that you chose so that you can explain the child's development using information from the textbook. So you can read the assignment directions and then use these steps to help you interpret their development. So good luck to you, and as always, if you have any questions, be sure that you reach out to me.